Aston Martin has surely been this year's surprise. Nobody would have thought they would start the season like they did, and now that they've reached the podium 4 times in 5 races, they feel like it's time to win a Grand Prix. But if Aston Martin wants to defeat Red Bull in Formula 1 in a direct battle this season, it must considerably outdevelop the world champion team. And luckily, they have a special weapon and a special race coming up. Does Aston Martin have any chance to win in Monaco? And could we see them challenge the Red Bulls more often? Red Bull's present lead is enormous, more so in race trim than in qualifying. Thus, Aston Martin must make significant improvements if it is to compete for a Grand Prix win without relying on outside assistance. Fernando Alonso had 4 podiums and 1 4th-place finish in 5 races. But the margins to the winning Red Bull in the 4 races that went to the finish line under normal circumstances were 38 seconds, 21 seconds, 22 seconds and 26 seconds. His actual effort has been to ensure that Aston Martin is the best of the rest in its own war with Mercedes and Ferrari. It seems that qualifying is quite important now, because race pace is very similar, and I think now we enter into a part of the season that it is going to be very interesting. Which team is developing the car faster? Alonso stated this in April. The first 3 races being away from Europe, it's difficult to bring upgrades and things like that. But from now on, maybe we'll see the level of the teams changing a little bit, race by race, depending on who brings an upgrade that is good enough. Since then, several innovations have begun to emerge. A low drag rear wing for Aston Martin in Azerbaijan, a new floor for Ferrari in Miami, and a suite of enhancements scheduled for Mercedes at Imola, but now pushed back to Monaco. What about Red Bull though? That is the ultimate benchmark, and as Aston Martin team manager Mike Crack recently stated, Chairman Lawrence Stroll is not pleased with podium finishes. This initiative was designed to succeed, and there is now a significant, demonstrable gap to Red Bull if that is to happen. Aston Martin, on the other hand, has its own tangible edge this season, and it has the potential to be a potent weapon if Aston Martin can make the most of it. Every team is subject to aerodynamic testing limits under F1 rules, and that system has been hampered in recent years. In essence, the lower your position in the championship, the more wind tunnel and CFD work you are permitted to conduct. Aston Martin has already profited from this with in-season upgrades last year, since an early change of concept necessitated extra development effort. Aston Martin, fortunately, had significant ATR allowances because of placing 7th in 2021, and then only 8th in the championship mid-season last year. It definitely helps, say technical director Dan Fallows. It's definitely been a big positive for us, because we had to do a lot of catching up with our development, having changed concepts early last year. We saw during last year that we managed to make a lot of progress with that concept, and that's in no small part down to the ATR limits that we have. How much of a penalty would it be if that gets reduced in the future? Now, I think that we've got a good development direction to pursue. It wouldn't be that much of a penalty. It's an advantage for sure at the moment. The mechanism was intended to burn slowly. It was never intended that a team that finished extremely low down one year and had a large allowance would suddenly have the second fastest car the next year. But that's exactly what occurred in 2022 and 2023. Despite finishing 7th last season, Aston Martin has one of the largest ATR allowances on the grid. At the same time, it possesses the second best average car, particularly in races. Red Bull gets the smallest allotment, with an additional 10% deducted from whatever it is entitled to until October, as a punishment for exceeding F1's budget cap in 2021. So here is Aston Martin's quantitative edge over Red Bull. It has 118 more wind tunnel runs, and can create 740 more CFD items each aerodynamic testing session, approximately 8 weeks than Red Bull. In actual terms, it's 1.5 times what Red Bull can achieve in the same amount of time. This has been the case thus far in 2023, and will continue to be the case until the numbers are reset at the end of June, based on this year's Constructors' Championship rankings at the time. Although even then, Aston Martin, now second in the points, will have more to play with than Red Bull. In theory, this may be Aston Martin's ace under its sleeve. It has an opportunity to gain momentum while Mercedes and Ferrari get their things in order, and it has greater resources to divide over in-season development and 2024. The other teams will have to make additional sacrifices one way or another. And Red Bull has the least amount of leeway, which is why their approach this year was to assault the start as strongly as possible, bank victories and a points advantage, and then turn to 2024 as soon as possible. This opens the way for it to be apprehended. Like anything, it's how you use it, Red Bull team boss Christian Horner said in April. We've got a limited amount of aero time. We're almost 6 months through since the penalty started, and of course it's not just this year's car it affects, it's next year's as well. Up to the point that it's reset mid-season, Aston have got a lot of research time available to them, so it's how you utilize it. Certainly within the confines of the budget cap as well now. So how can Aston Martin capitalize on this advantage? First and foremost, it is in a better situation than it was last year. It makes no difference how much more wind tunnel time or CFD work you have if the base car is bad, the technical staff lacks direction, and the necessary equipment are not available. Aston Martin, on the other hand, has already gone through a lot since Fallows and other high-profile hires came, which means its technical staff has been better groomed, and with the brand new facility set to open soon, the team should have more resources at its disposal. When combined with the progress of 2022, Aston Martin is more likely to strike a bigger hit. It definitely helps, says Tom McCullough, performance director at Aston Martin. But I don't think that's the dominant factor. I think it's more the restructuring that we've done, the lessons that we learned early last year, and then the lessons we learned during last year. What we're seeing now is just a continuation of that, because there was a lot of stuff last year which, from the cost cap side, we couldn't do. In years gone by, we would have made last year's car even quicker during the season. According to McCullough, Aston Martin's objective within the budgetary and developmental constraints is simply to develop the hell out of this car and get as close to them as we can get. But maybe development isn't needed for the upcoming race, as Aston Martin might be able to keep the Red Bulls behind in Monaco. Fernando Alonso certainly believes in it. In Monaco, it will be a lot different. It would be a stretch to interpret Fernando Alonso's remark to Max Verstappen in the podium room following the Miami Grand Prix as a vow that he will win the Monaco Grand Prix for Aston Martin. That's because it happened during a discussion about how rapidly Verstappen caught and overtook Alonso in Miami, despite starting in 9th place. Contrary to Alonso's estimate that it would happen around lap 25, it happened halfway through lap 15. Verstappen acknowledged that such an overtaking maneuver would be significantly more difficult in Monaco, raising the tantalizing issue of whether Alonso might hold off the Red Bulls on the Principality's street to break its decade-long F1 victory drought. It's not completely out of the question. While there's no reason to anticipate anything other than Red Bull to have the fastest car in Monaco, track position might be an issue. And if there is a flaw with the Red Bull RB19, it is in qualifying. That may seem like an outrageous allegation for a team that's won 4 of the 5 Grand Prix in 2023, but Red Bull has been under significantly greater pressure in qualifying throughout the season. Its qualifying advantages have been 0.154, 0.155, 0.236 and 0.361 seconds, while it was defeated by Charles Leclerc by 0.188 seconds in Baku's main qualifying session. Red Bull has been in another level in the races. Red Bull's main issue in qualifying has been front tyre warm-up. This is most likely due to the severe anti-dive settings in the front suspension, which also lowers brake feeling and makes locking up easier. This might be a particular issue in Monaco's short, pointed streets. It's also a course that will mitigate the benefit of Red Bull's numerous assets, namely its aero efficiency. Both with and without DRS, it's a force to be reckoned with on the straights, which are few and far between in Monaco. This may also make qualification more challenging. As a result, it's not out of the question that Alonso, who won Monaco from pole position for Renault in 2006 and McLaren in 2007, will start at the front. If he accomplishes that, history suggests he might remain. And while Alonso and Aston Martin's chances of winning this year are already reasonable, given that he's been best of the rest in 4 of the 5 races this year, and is thus consistently well placed to pick up the pieces if Red Bull falters, Monaco offers the tantalizing possibility of a victory shot on merit. The squad is aware that Monaco increases the likelihood of such a scenario, but it is realistic about the prospects. "I'd love to say that a win's possible this season," said technical director Dan Fallows. There are obviously some circuits where it's not the normal run of play necessarily. Sometimes cars that have particular characteristics can play out. For example, in Monaco, tracks like that. So I'd love to say that. But honestly, I think we're realistic about our situation, where we are at the moment. Our focus is really on just maxing the amount of performance we get on the car in the shortest possible time. And we'll see what kind of rewards that brings. What do you think? Will Aston Martin be able to win in Monaco? And what about the out-developing trend? Do you see Aston Martin getting closer using all of their allotted time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below.